So let's get started. Good evening. My name is Matthew Lawrence. I am the Canon for Spiritual Formation here at Trinity Cathedral. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome my good friend Chris Bell, who is an astonishingly smart person and spiritually grounded and beautiful in just about every way. Well, he's my best friend, so I get a little carried away. Chris Bell was the Unitarian Universalist pastor in Santa Rosa, California for 15 years. 12 of those years overlapped with my tenure down there across the street from his at the Episcopal Parish in Santa Rosa. So that's how we got to know each other. And eventually we became roommates and best friends. And now Chris has moved up to Portland, and he is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School, and also is a very advanced Zen student. I think Chris has almost completed all the koans, which means that soon he should be given transmission as an official Zen teacher. Am I right on that, Chris?
You may be.
Yeah. Not to get ahead of ourselves here.
That's up to my teacher.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I'll put a word in for you
Thank you.
because that would really help, I'm sure. So thank you, Chris, for being here. And the floor is yours, my friend.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Matt. And thanks everybody for being here and welcome. And it's nice to kind of be back in this setting. Although, Zoom is not the format that most of us have been wanting to meet under for these last months or years. It's actually a delight that we have it. Not least tonight because I'm actually in Denver, Colorado, visiting my son. I'm here in his apartment where he lives with his girlfriend. And so it's great to be able to actually participate in this way and still take my family vacation. I just want to say a word or two about my background. Talk a little bit about the housekeeping elements of the class, kind of how we'll organize things, and give you an overview of what I hope we'll do over the upcoming 5 weeks and tonight. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And here is what we're going to do tonight. We're doing introductions, a little housekeeping. We'll have a one-on-one breakout, some lecture sorts of things, and a little bit of small group, and wrap up by giving you some things to think about for the next class. If you can see this is the way I'm imagining the 5 weeks will go, kind of an overview tonight. We'll look at concerns around authority and tradition in the second week, some major figures of religious liberalism in the third week. A big subset of what we call religious liberalism is the social gospel, which we'll get to in the fourth week, and then wrap up by kind of a critique of religious liberalism and some possible ways that it might move forward into the future. I'm going to change the chat just to hosts and co-hosts. That's me and Matt. And that's for my own sake. If you have anything you'd like to add or a comment or anything, I would love it if you would just raise your hand, either by waving it in the screen where I'll try to see it, or better still using the raise hand and the reactions button, or whatever, wherever you find it on whatever device you're using. And that's just because that pull away, if people are offering comments or whatever to the side, can sometimes be distracting, at least for me, if I'm trying to remember what the heck I'm talking about, which is often a challenge. So I'm changing that now, and if you have something to add, please just raise your hand and I'll call on you at any point. All right. So as Matt said, I have been a Unitarian Universalist minister, and Unitarian Universalists like to think of themselves as the primary stewards or great champions of religious liberalism, and though that's not true. But nevertheless, I guess that and a degree from Harvard Divinity School would make me at least ostensibly qualified to lead a group on religious liberalism. But as Matt pointed out, what you're actually witnessing here is just sheer nepotism. It's just shameful. He's giving an opportunity to his best friend. But I'm very grateful for it. I know I'm teasing you. And I love you, and I'm glad to be here. You know, you don't like to hear people say this, but I will tell you, some of my best friends are Episcopalian, and that includes not only Matt, but some of my closest friends from Divinity School. So there is kind of I have a now decades-long kind of just sort of permanent encounter with Episcopalianism, and that's enriched my own life, and this is another example of that, and so I'm really grateful for this chance. And I've met some of you in the Richard Rohr class and on my visits to the cathedral, so it's nice to see some of you again. And thanks for having me. Just two things I want to say about myself. One, if you can't tell if I'm joking, I probably am, because I often am. So if you think that was a weird thing for him to say, you can just write it up to me thinking I'm funny, whether or not I actually am. And the other thing is, my God, looking at myself here in the video screen, I can see that taking a hike today at 5,000 feet altitude and forgetting to put sunscreen on is a little bit different than taking a walk in Portland. So I'm quite literally glowing with enthusiasm for our class tonight. Okay. Now, though we're going to survey thinkers and ideas in some detail. Celia.
Okay, so you don't have to answer this now, but at some point I would really like to know whether Unitarianism, which is what I think you said you were, is in a lineage with transcendentalism, American transcendentalism, since you referred to the 19th century. And so I want to know if that's a lineage. And mainly I'm thinking about the horrible father of Little Women, who was a transcendentalist. So just at some point, I want to know whether Unitarianism is in a lineage with transcendentalism.
Okay. Well, since I'm not sure it'll come up again, I will just briefly say that many of the transcendentalists, notably Ralph Waldo Emerson, Alcott, of whom you mentioned there, Theodore Parker, others, Margaret Fuller, were all in Unitarian circles or had come directly out of Unitarian congregations. Contemporary Unitarian Universalists, who are the merger of those old school Unitarians and those old school Universalists, do claim the transcendentalists as part of our spiritual stream. But, you know, whether or not Alcott has problems or something is a separate topic. So when we get to some of in week 3, I will be talking about some of the transcendentalists, and perhaps more of that will come up then. Please don't hold the excesses of the 1800s against me. All right. Then I will say that for me personally, what makes experiences like this worthwhile anymore in particular, now that I have left the Unitarian Universalist ministry, is less detailed surveys of thinkers and arguments and ideas, although I will have some of that, but more just what do these ideas and perspectives have to say to us as people who are trying to be decent human beings, and spiritual or religious beings, however we understand that. And the part that's more fun and interesting for me is the conversation and reflection we'll enjoy together. So that means I'm going to send you out to one-on-ones at least once per session, and to maybe small groups as well, just to get our kind of thinking and talking juices flowing. And the first then that we'll do are just one-on-ones if it works out evenly numbers-wise. And I just want you to tackle, what does the word liberal mean to you? This is a word with some broad meanings. It has religious and political contexts. And since the class was called Religious Liberalism and you decided to sign up for it, you must have some thought about what that means. And this can be kind of from philosophical perspective or just even kind of gut level responses. When you think of that word liberal, what comes up for you? What does that mean? And I'll just give you a couple minutes each. I'll throw a text at like the 2-minute mark to say share. Just going to bring you back in about 4 minutes or so, and we'll hear from those groups and make a little word map of what this word means. Liberalism, liberal. What does that word mean to you? So here are breakout rooms with 2 participants. You're going to be randomly assigned. Accept your invitation, and off you go.
Nicely done, my friend. How's Colorado?
Nice, gorgeous. Super warm today. Beautiful.
Cool. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
How are things there?
Great. Yeah. Great. Hold on. I'm going to pause the recording.
I'll say someone had an experience of being paired off, but their partner wasn't there. Technical issue or whatever, who knows. Let me just say, if we ever do that again, and I'll try and remember this to say that, you can send a message to the host from the breakout room and we'll put you in with others so you don't have to sit there wondering what happened. All right. So I'm going to now try and do a Zoomy thing and share the whiteboard. And hopefully you see the word liberal. Could someone nod if that's the case? Okay, good. And tell me, please, what are some of the words or ideas that came up as you discussed this matter with each other? And I can't see you, so holler out, or Matt, call on people if that's somehow doable. Anybody? Say again?
Freedom.
Freedom. What else?
Progressive.
Progressive, meaning believing in progress.
And freedom from John Stuart Mill. Liberty.
Liberty, which may or may not be a different thing from freedom. Other ideas?
Generosity.
Generosity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about that one?
Well, just being open to those who have less and helping, being social minded in your generosity and really helping.
Okay, so specifically in helping others.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking curiosity about a wide range of beliefs and practices or something like that.
Curiosity.
I think in the religious context, the contrast would be open as opposed to more literal scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Open-mindedness.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't, some people might argue that open-mindedness in reading scripture is not always good. So it's another way of saying that is it's non-literal, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we'll just say non-literal.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes.
Believing.
No value judgment yet on any of these things. Like freedom might be a good thing. Freedom might also be a bad thing. It might depend. Any other notions?
I'm thinking, or I shared in our group on generosity and open-mindedness, that not everyone who sees themselves as liberal is generous or open-minded.
Not necessarily.
Yes. Well, we can
That's my
surely.
perception. That's my perception, right? Speaking for myself.
Well, no group is exempt from hypocrisy
Very good.
Right.
or falling short of their ideals.
Right.
Any other words to put on this?
Change is a means of improvement, and liberals don't fear it.
Right. Acceptance of
We
change.
actually believe it can bring goodness.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think of liberal politically as looking to the future, whereas conservatism remains rooted in the past.
We had something similar to that. A dialogue with modernity and evolutionary and non-orthodox.
What was the other? There was something in the middle there.
Evolutionary? I think that's implied with some things progressive.
Yes, and change as a means of improvement, openness to change. I wrote acceptance to change. I should perhaps say of. All right, the whiteboard's almost full. One or two more, or any?
Chris, I seem to remember from my liberal arts days that the word liberal in the English language came into common use as protecting the rights of the minority against a tyranny of the majority. And that actually it was during when Parliament was beginning to be reformed and the landed gentry needed to have their rights protected against the mob rule of a very democratic parliament. And so the liberals were really protecting the interests of the privileged class at that time. But it's really about minority rights against majority rule.
Okay, yeah, yes.
And I think the root of the word liberal is the same root as the word for liber, book.
Book.
I think it's freedom, free.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is related to liberty, obviously. Whether that relates to book is an interesting notion that I would have to think about or look into. There might be some resonance, though, with the fact that I at least associate liberal as well with education, inquiry, scientific inquiry, these kinds of things too.
Learning, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe that's good for now. I haven't figured out the whiteboard. I can't go back to that list somehow, so it looks a little weird there. I'm going to save that, and we can consult it later. Okay, well, that looks about right to me, and we could pull it apart a little bit. You can see some common themes, and I think that what we'll discover is that at least religious liberals have positively affirmed these descriptions of liberalism within religion. That there are probably none of these would anyone who identifies as religious liberals or even political liberals necessarily say, no, that's not it. But what we'll discover, I think, is that it's actually a broader spectrum than we might regularly be aware of. I'm going to stop the share so we can see each other again. And okay. Don't know what to do about that. So much so when I say that spectrum is very broad, that the place I most commonly notice this, and you might as well, is that, within religion, we'll be able to draw some fairly clear lines between religious liberalism and orthodoxy or fundamentalism or literalism. And then, of course, that's a spectrum with stuff in the middle. Politically, we're at those divisions between folks who would describe themselves or be described as liberal and conservative feels sharper, more acute than it has ever been for some of us. Whether that's true or not is open to debate. And yet, frequently when you're reading more high-level observations of our government or the democratic system or the political projects of the West or so forth, the whole darn thing, including most conservatives who still want democracy, that all gets called liberalism. Like, America itself is a liberal undertaking as long as people of extraordinarily different views still agree that there should be something like a neutral forum within which those ideas contest each other and play out. It would only be people who say we should eliminate other points of views or ours should win at any cost or whatever that might fall outside of liberalism. Such that you have a group like the Cato Institute, which is funded by the Koch brothers and has been a powerful conservative political force in the country. They'll defend liberalism per se in terms of democratic systems, free markets, minimal government intrusion in personal lives, and so forth. So we have to be a little wary. We'll actually probably be talking a little bit more in that narrow, within religion, religious liberals vis-a-vis more conservative folks and so on. The reason it's worth paying any attention to this at all is my tradition and your tradition would fall within what we call religious liberalism, broadly speaking. So we have some self-interest in knowing more about it, but also religious liberalism is in some ways in jeopardy as we look at the decline of the mainstream churches.
Yes, can I push back against you just a little bit?
Sure.
So, I don't think conservatism is a term that even applies anymore. I mean, you brought up the Koch brothers, and I don't want to go into this, but I don't feel like that we really do. I feel like what you're saying is sort of an ideal, that there's this kind of liberal conservative balance in the US and we can rely on it. I don't think we can anymore. And the very concept of conservatism, I think, is basically a thing that is almost a sentimental cliche from the past. And what we're looking at is something really much more radical than that. Anyway, I don't want to subvert your point of view, but I just want to say that I just think that what we're dealing with now is much more unstable than that.
Okay. Here is, I thought, a really good definition of liberal religion from Unitarian Universalist minister David Bumbaugh. And it kind of captures the broad arc of the things that we'll be talking about. He notes that its period of greatest influence, at least in America, was probably between the years of the end of the Civil War and the early part of the 20th century. But as I'll get into shortly, we can go much farther back than that to find its roots. And his brief summation of our topic, he says, during those decades, liberal religion sought to structure and promote a faith that embraced the challenges presented by new scholarship in a variety of fields. A faith that embraced the challenges presented by new scholarship in a variety of fields, from biblical studies to the emerging social sciences. It sought to accommodate rather than dispute the findings of the physical sciences. It offered a confident vision of human progress toward a world consistent with the best moral and ethical teachings of Western religious traditions. It offered an enduring critique of the Gilded Age of untrammeled greed and corruption and imperialist expansion. It concerned itself with the plight of the marginalized and forgotten, and it preached a gospel that insisted that the building of the kingdom of God is a human task to be engaged in this world, here and now. That captures the broad arc, I think, though, as he notes, time has not dealt well with the vision and faith of liberal religion. A few too many wars and political setbacks and so forth have challenged it. So that is what we're getting at. All right. Now, the context of that, then, a little bit of a kind of a history lesson, I guess. So, you know, there's Jesus and early Christianity and 1,300 years of Catholic history, and then we get to the Protestant Reformation. Okay, everybody with me so far? And there are, I think you can make an argument that as soon as the Protestant Reformation, or revolution might be a better word, gets underway, to some extent we're already in the proto stage of religious liberalism, where one of the key words, I think, that relates to those things that you talked about with freedom and liberty and so on, is choice. Choice and personal responsibility. A move toward an increased granting of authority to individuals. And though the freedom to be not Roman Catholic, or later to be not Lutheran, if you lived in northern Germany or something, was disputed for, tragically, centuries at the point of a sword. Nevertheless, you know, those ideas clearly took hold and have endured to this day. So we can go back that far to find some of the beginning seeds. Many would say that the theological and more philosophical roots of liberalism, broadly speaking, come from the Age of Enlightenment, if you'll recall that lovely little phrase. Those figures of, you know, Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes, that comes out of Renaissance humanism and includes the scientific revolution and the philosophical thinkings of Descartes and the emergence of the scientific revolution. I think I said that already, with Newton and Francis Bacon and that sort. You know, that, as you recall, is kind of revolutionary, particularly in terms of people's dealings with the church. And one thing that the political thinkers in particular of that age so strongly emphasized, thinking Locke in particular, Rousseau, was again the preeminence of the individual, the beauty and importance of the self. The dignity of the self, the reason to have political liberty, the reason to not oppress minorities, was because the human being was seen with a kind of renewed value, might be a shorthand for one of the impacts of the thinking of that age. And then, you know, all of the new ideas that the scientific revolution brought about, most of which challenge a literal or a literal understanding, particularly of the Bible as the primary source of truth. Many wise people through centuries prior to the 17 and 1800s might find themselves believing that the earth was very old. But the emergence of geology as a science in the 1700s and early 1800s, as much or even more than Darwinism, which has a profound impact later, each of these things offered really fundamental level challenges to Scripture and the church's interpretation of it as you know, being reliable for the full presentation of truth. You know, you add up the years in the Bible, and there's still some people who think the world's only whatever it is, 6,000 years old or something. But by the time the evidence of geology had been exhaustively proven, And then Darwin's impact even more profound, conveying the possibility of a natural world that moved itself forward on its own laws and principles without needing the guiding or planning hand of a creator. This is that accommodation to the physical sciences that that Bumbaugh mentioned. These are all, profound impacts and ideas within modernity that religion struggles to make sense of. And religious liberalism, broadly speaking, is the response that says, okay, we can handle that. As a part of that challenge to Scripture, another significant factor in the emergence of religious liberalism is the broad field that we would call biblical criticism, which is when people with a kind of scientific mind began to say, perhaps we should look at these books with the same critical capacities, context, language, the style, the form, who wrote it for whom and when, that we would apply to any other ancient book. If we're trying to understand the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have to learn about Sumer, and we have to learn the language, and we have to understand the backdrop of their mythology. And what we have to understand the culture that would have produced such a thing, and who are those temple lovers anyway, and so on. And basically science-minded, critical-minded scholars, whoever, they said, let's do the same thing with the Bible. And, it's so easy for us in the modern age to forget how kind of radical that was. You might start biblical criticism as far back as Spinoza in the mid-1600s, who dared to suggest that the first 5 books of the Bible might not have been actually written by Moses. And later form and linguistic criticism can point to multiple sources in those books that would confirm that suspicion. Spinoza didn't have to do any more than you or I might do at a careful, quick reading, which is to wonder, how on earth could Moses write a description of his own death? Which comes at the end of Deuteronomy. That alone would make you think maybe he didn't write the book, unless it was his last act. And look at me typing it. I don't know how many words per minute Moses could type. But from that beginning, maybe, a whole tradition that got much more serious about looking into that book in a scholarly manner. Has a profound impact on people's relationship to Scripture. And then the last thing I think that is still going on, that's a factor that has shaped religious liberalism, is also just the industrialization and complexification of society, the way that particularly once we could harness power in a different way, so many of our institutions, the way we built things, organized our society and so forth, changed. The emergence of a capitalist system, all of these things. And to some extent, particularly early on, as you noted, Matt, some of this might have been to kind of protect emerging interests and to justify the new lives of people who were acquiring power and wealth outside of the boundaries of the church, where it had been primarily confined, except for kings and nobles and so forth. All of these, I think you can see, were cause to rethink the basic assertions that the Bible taught you everything you needed to know about human and natural history, just as it was described and interpreted for you by whatever church you happened to be born into or have had taken over your land during the 100 Years' War or something. And so it is from those seeds of change and turmoil that our religious liberalism was born. Thoughts or questions about any of that so far? Or did I miss anything? Okay, well, gosh, so far so good. All right, now, this might feel a little random, but as we start talking about religious liberalism, we need to get a little bit more anchored in just what is this religion thing anyway, within which one might be liberal or conservative or fundamentalist or any other thing. And so again, without too much kind of backdrop, I just want to get you thinking about that. And so now we're going to do small groups just so it's a different dynamic. I'll try and get you into groups of 4. If you find yourself sitting with people who are not speaking to you, leave the group and we'll get you with others. And I want you to consider this question. Take a moment to think about it, and then I'll forge the breakout rooms. What is the point of religion? What is the point of being religious? Why are people, maybe even, why are you religious? What is the point of that? Okay? And hopefully that will be interesting to you. What is the point of religion? I'm going to recreate the rooms so that there are larger groups, which I have just done. And please accept this invitation. What is the point of religion? Okay, welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
I'm going to go to the whiteboard again then, and we'll do a similar kind of thing and see some of the words. We're going to clear all drawings. Schwap. And now our question was, what is the point of religion, of being religious? And I would love to hear some of your conclusions, some of the things that you might have discovered you had in common with one another, or were there any areas of disagreement, or just what was the meat? I see that Celia's raised her hand.
Thank you. So some of us just finished the Rohr group, and I believe it's Richard Rohr who defines religion as religio. So ligature, binding together. And so religion is that which binds us to a community, to a particular faith.
Okay. Rose?
Yeah, I really struggle with the question itself. I feel like the question itself is flawed.
Let's hear it.
You're assuming that religion is something that humans choose, people choose, and I honestly feel that contextually, because of the greater point in the universe, what's going on, God chooses us to be religious. We seek out a connection that is inherently part of us. It's not something necessarily for a function.
But wait, you just said, say your last sentence again.
Oh gosh. We are inherently religious beings. God doesn't necessarily choose. Oh gosh. We don't choose religion as a function.
Right, but it's God chooses it for us. But you said something about connecting us or to a larger or deeper reality, something like that. What?
God gifts us religion.
For what purpose?
As a way to build community, I guess. But it's not something that has a point.
Okay. All right, well, think about that. Others? Thank you, Rose. Did I see another hand, Matt, or I can't see anybody here?
Jim and Denise.
Thank you.
This was a tough question. Several of the things that we built on were called to the more, and to engage the not seen. We talked about community also, making sense of the world that's out there.
If you're not actively speaking, it would help if you mute yourself, everybody. Thank you kindly. When I get back to that screen, I can mute you, or maybe you can do that, Matt. Okay, to help make sense, forgive me. Could you complete that thought, Denise? You're muted. Oh.
There. To help make sense of the world. And we talked about commitment and balances, trust, encourage our spiritual compassion. And then we talked a lot about what that means.
Okay. Okay, good. Any other thoughts from other groups or other individuals?
All right.
Good on your
I couldn't understand that. I see Bruce, you raising your hand, perhaps? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, yes. I think religion, it's a loaded term, obviously, and it could be negative or positive. On the positive side, it strikes me as something that is developing our relationship with God, in addition to community, of course, but relationship with God. And, you know, Jesus did not come to institute a religion or to build preachers, but to bring the kingdom of heaven and relationship with God.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Thank you. Anyone else? Was there a group that hasn't? I can't tell. I'm sorry.
I'm not seeing any other raised hands.
Good. Matt, would you share what you shared with me?
Yeah, what did I say?
That it was about finding our place in the universe.
Yeah, finding our place in the universe, connecting our story with the story of generations past, in the process, finding and making meaning of our experience. And we're making meaning of both ordinary experience, such as suffering and death and gratitude, but we're also making meaning of extraordinary experience, revelation, epiphany, apparitions. And so we're connecting to all of that. And also to the experience of being freed of our ego boundaries, connected to the bigger reality.
At least on my screen, that has disappeared off the bottom. I don't know how that is for you. Okay.
That's good enough.
Okay.
There you
go. I thought I saw a hand. Barb, maybe?
Barb Milken.
Yeah. I guess at a very basic level, I was thinking about when I was a little girl. It was like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And I also think that faith or religion is something that evolves over time. And there's a beauty in that.
So that its point might even evolve over time.
Right. I mean, I feel like I understand so much more now at my age how we're interconnected with the entire world than I did when I was younger. And sorry, I'm going to mute myself. My kitty is pretty mad. I'm not letting her out.
That's a happy sound to my ears, though, just so you know. All right, so religion evolves. Perhaps the point of religion evolves too. Sure, yes, as we do. Michael. Be sure to unmute yourself.
I was muttering about the emoticons. I was just going to say that if we start off asking what is religion, or what's the point of religion, we have to recognize that we have to find a term that would work for all religions. And our natural tendency, both by our personal choices or history, will be to answer that question in a Christian idiom. And I just thought we should also start with, before we narrow it down, to think what would be meaningful to the Navajo Indian and the Siberian shaman and that sort of thing, the Sufi and all that. Indeed. Which would be a broader definition. But most of these that Matt listed would work for almost any religion.
Well, it seems a good point to mention that John Dewey, who is a major figure in liberalism and to some extent in religious liberalism, though he didn't really turn to religious matters until later in his life, publishing A Common Faith, I think when he was in his 70s, and which is available online. I'll provide a link at some point. He said religion was such a broad term if by it you meant the various ways that human beings had ordered themselves and conducted activities in relation to, you know, broadly speaking, some power greater than themselves. But that the ways that which that had been defined varied so greatly that the forms of religion were so different and included everything from, you know, bloodletting rituals and murder to selfless sacrifice of self for others. You know, one line says something like, humans have conducted rites, R-I-T-E-S, for every conceivable purpose. So if you're trying to define religion by like what people are doing in community together, it's so broad that it almost doesn't mean anything other than like being human beings. But he used another term, religious, by which he meant that inner experience of connection with the larger whole, that could be found in all, that could also be found in all cultures. And that he argued, and many other religious liberals, as we'll get into, would argue in some ways it transcends any of those like concrete forms. So you're very much onto something. Can we even agree on what religion is? I mean, to me, this is the wonder of all of these sorts of conversations, and it's where they all end up. You know, try and teach a class on justice, and you discover that there is no shared definition of that word. And that any definition is so plainly marked by the person who puts it forward's place and time and context that it becomes, you know, very difficult. you have to maybe move to a higher order or to something that transcends words in order to actually find the common ground there. This is all really good stuff. Thank you for that. And I'm so intrigued by perhaps God chooses us to be religious. I think we'll come back to that. Because even the most hardy, experience-oriented religious liberal tends to argue that that thing comes to us naturally. We'll get into that. I'm going to save this whiteboard to try and make some use of it later, and I'm going to stop the sharing so I can see your smiling faces again. So you are all right. All of those answers were correct. Religion does all of those things and more. And from the perspective, I think, broadly speaking, of religious liberalism, the most important point is that it is fundamentally, as somebody said, about connecting us with God, howsoever conceived, with the fundamental layer of reality, with Buddha nature, if we want to go beyond Christian confines, but within it, it is about an experience. It is about cultivating an awareness, a direct relationship with God, which is a huge part of what the Protestant Reformation was all about, taking the intermediaries away. You could read your own Bible and you could conduct your own prayers so that you yourself would know the saving and healing power of God's love. This is found throughout most of the major thinkers that we'll encounter. And that does stand in some contrast to other notions, it does contribute and it does help to build community, but classic religious liberalism, Schleiermacher, Dewey, and others would say even that is just fundamentally so that we ourselves, each person, can through that community understand our relationship to God better. That may make demands on us, like compassionately serving others. But it still frequently distills down to the individual and their experience. Father Matt, your hand.
Obviously, the word God is a very big word that, for example, Unitarian Universalists don't all agree that that's why they're together. And there are certainly humanist, non-theist religions. And then there's religions that are involved in the spirit world, but maybe not God or the whole, but particular spirits more locally accessed or known. But it's some supernatural thing. But what do we think of the atheist or humanist or non-theist religions?
What do I think of them?
Yeah, are they religions?
Well, I think, so again, we'd have to spend a lot of time, defining that. I would say if a person is a religious humanist, so described or so self-claimed, or a religious naturalist, or for that matter, just a good Buddhist, you can not find, yes, many of those words or concepts or God or any of that or worship or whatever. But if a person says, in contrast to being like a secular humanist, I'm a religious humanist, and Unitarian Universalists, many, claim that very identity. What makes that tradition ironic is that there are many within it who want to say this is not a religion. And I guess my final take would be you're not religious if you don't want to be, I guess. But the claim that I would make, and certainly that Dewey or Schleiermacher or any of these others would make, is that those people are living human beings who exist in this universe, which is plainly larger and more powerful than they are. And so if they are, as good religious humanists or religious naturalists do, seeking to orient themselves to find their place in that, to determine from it in relationship what the right way to live and be is, then whether you're saying I want to live in harmony with nature, or I want to live in harmony with my fellow human beings, or I want to live in harmony with God, or I want to live in harmony with, Shiva, you're moving in the same direction. And many have argued you're operating out of the same impulse that's actually born into you as a meaning-seeking, community-grounded, relational being. So I'm willing to expand the boundary of the definition of religious to include, all kinds of things. And certainly if you're claiming it for yourself, it's yours, because, we all just agreed we don't even know quite how to define it. Let's see, DRG.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are my initials. My name is David Gray.
Hi, David.
Hello. On the question of what is there such a thing as, if you're humanist, can you be a religious humanist? As a humanist for about 10 years or so, and an atheist, I would not accept that term, because the most common understanding of what religion means is that it does assume there's a supernatural power. And humanists don't believe that, or at least almost all of them don't. The term I believe that I prefer to religion is belief system. Everybody has a belief system. For many people, it's based entirely or partly on a form of religion, Christianity, Islam, and so forth. But we all have belief systems, even if there's no belief in a supernatural involved. I'll stop there.
Thank you. And you've illustrated in advance one of the key tensions and concerns within religious liberalism, is that actually most of the folks that we think of as the larger figures, what they were trying to do was actually argue for a form of religion that was not dependent upon belief in the supernatural. Again, as so conceived, because supernatural, or, natural but not visible to us, those are, we can talk about what's going on there. But one of the major tensions within this movement is to argue for more natural against supernatural forms of religion. So you've hit one of the core pieces, which will make for a fine segue after I hear from Steve on his iPhone.
Well, just that reminded me of Paul Tillich, who, in trying to talk about being religious, would say that everybody is religious if you think of it in terms of what is your ultimate concern. Everybody has something that is their ultimate reason for being. And many of us try to put our ultimate concern, or try to develop an ultimate concern that goes beyond where a lot of other people are putting their ultimate concern, whether that be earning as much money or gaining as much power as I can, or etc.
Right.
Kill it.
And we might, thank you for bringing him in, and we'll hear more from him. And as to, so if a person's concern is money or personal power over others in a malicious kind of way, that might in fact be their ultimate concern. And I guess I have to admit, I'm not willing to then say, oh, well, that's just another form of religion, and we should accept that along with all the others because we're good and tolerant people. One could make a compelling argument, as I think Tillich himself would, that if you've made money or personal power over others your ultimate concern, that what you're actually committing is idolatry. And so you're practicing, quote, false religion. But religious liberals and naturalists might argue you may be operating out of the same impulse, just distorted or inaccurate, falsely selfish, or unaware of the factual reality of your connection to others or to the rest of the universe or something like that. That's good stuff right there. Oh, back to Bruce. Can't hear you.
I know C.S. Lewis, I'm not sure where he'd fit in the spectrum of liberalism, but he and others with good minds would say, if, you can talk about religion, but rather we want to talk about Christian-centered religion, Christ-based religion. And when you talk about that, that's a religion based on the supernatural. So for that point of view, supernatural is for sure.
Can you say more about why you're affirming that as so clearly and plainly supernatural?
Well, I suppose for a lot of Christian Christ believers, a critical issue and point is he rose from the dead.
Yes. And
that's
Rohr would argue, as he did in the book we read recently, that actually what the resurrection was the ultimate example, an extraordinary and maybe unique example of the tendency for the whole universe to constantly resurrect. And by that perspective, then you could say that there was nothing supernatural about the resurrection at all. It was just a unique occurrence of a broader phenomena.
That's real broad.
Hey, I'm a Unitarian. So what I want to do with these final moments then is raise up some of the tensions that we're going to be tackling, as it were, as our conversation goes forward. Well, let me see if that might be too much for this late moment in the class. Maybe I'll come back to that. What do you do with 8 minutes?
Chris, let me offer this. Somebody mentioned C.S. Lewis, and a friend of mine just sent me this beautiful quote from C.S. Lewis, which coincidentally happens to go right to this question, I think. He said, "We do not merely want to see beauty, though God knows even that is bounty enough. We want something else which can be hardly put into words, to be united with the beauty we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it." For me, that speaks to the very ordinary human experience of intuiting a connection to something about the natural world and our experience in it, that we just want more of it, more joy, more beauty. It's not enough to see it. We want to bathe in it. This is the sacramental nature of religion for a lot of us, and the ritual comes into play, and the contemplative experience comes into play. This religion becomes a vehicle by which we elevate our experience into something bigger than just the ordinary, mundane, get up, go to work, come home, go to sleep, get up, go to work again. You know what I mean?
I do.
There's something more.
That's beautiful.
I'll try that out.
Yes. And to complement, I'll throw this quote from Schleiermacher. Religion's essence is neither thinking nor acting, but intuition and feeling. It wishes to intuit the universe, wishes devoutly to overhear the universe's own manifestations and actions. Some would put God in the place of this word universe. Longs to be grasped and filled by the universe's immediate influences in childlike passivity, to receive it, to bathe in it, as it were. Religion wishes to see the infinite, its imprint, and its manifestation in humanity no less than in all other individual and finite forms. So we might say that Schleiermacher and Lewis share that understanding or that awareness, and I cannot doubt that C.S. Lewis had a deeply personal and experiential understanding of his faith. And I will not call C.S. Lewis a religious liberal. Neither would he.
Right.
And Schleiermacher is, as we'll talk about more next week. And yet, isn't that interesting, then, that they're both, as I would argue, because I'm a religious liberal, they have to be anchored in their own experience. Because there's actually no other way to exist. It's just then, what do we do with that? A hand from Celia.
Oh, I was just going to say, speaking of being bathed in religion, Freud, an avowed atheist, said religion was ein ozeanisches Gefühl, a feeling of being in the ocean and being bathed by water. And if you want to share that, wouldn't that be evangelism?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, religion has done a lot of things for a lot of reasons, some of which have nothing to do with the personal experience of the oceanic love reality, some of which are very much about just squeezing some money out of you or taking your cows or, you know, making sure that you elect my guy or whatever. We all know this. So, you know, it's not all rooted in that, but I guess it feels like the heart is there somehow. Yeah. Barbara. Milliken.
You both touched on a point that came up in our group, is separating how I think of, there's my faith and then there's the institution of the church. And I think a lot of people get confused about those things. But I also wonder, I must admit that I probably spent most of my life thinking about my faith from my point of view as a child. And, you know, lying in the grass one day, I have this vivid memory of just the wind was blowing and it was fall. And I was thinking, I'm the grass, you know, I am the wind, I am the leaves. And that's where my mind was, you know, that's how I first thought of God. And then it was very interesting to me. I don't know if Scott Smiley is still here. I see his name, but he offered a class one term on how we saw God. And it was so interesting to hear what people had to say. And I also wonder, as we talk about different faiths, and as I think about the world many years ago, when people were really separated from each other, where, you know, all these different so-called world religions developed, I have this feeling that God appeared to people as they were able to see him. It's kind of connected to, I can't see her name anymore, Rose's idea of God coming to us. That God appeared to people and they saw him in the form that they could understand and make sense of, and that they developed their understanding of God. So to some people, God is Buddha, some it's, you know, it's,
and even the word God is too small.
Right.
Yes,
right.
Exactly that. Exactly.
Yeah. I'm with you all the way there. I always think of George Burns in the old movie Oh God, right? Who appeared to John Denver, lowly John Denver, as George Burns because he could take it. right? If he did the whole seraphim and cherubim and everything like that, he'd have a seizure. But he could handle George Burns. You know, I love that notion. And just in passing, I'll say another impact on religious liberalism was the increasing awareness of the sophisticated reality of other religions as the world became more global. It just got harder and harder to think of your own particular way as the one and only right way. And that posed a real challenge, you know, that this line of thinking has tried to respond to. Okay, gosh, great stuff. I thank you so much. I am posting in the chat a link to an article, Liberalism in Religion. If homework is an offensive term to you, can you think of this as optional reading? Edward Scribner Ames was a contemporary of Dewey at the University of Chicago, though he's somewhat forgotten to history. He doesn't even get a Wikipedia page, but he was sort of once upon a time thought of as one of the giants, creators of religious naturalism. And this is just a odd but rich, pithy summary of the of liberalism in religion, and it's available at JSTOR there. Now, I linked to that when I was at the Vancouver Library, which gave me access. You may have trouble finding it, but hopefully that search could turn it to you, and it's strictly optional. I may not even say a word about it next week, but it will give you a little deeper bath of the thinking there. And then the last thing I want is, please, when we come back next week for our one-on-ones, we've started to talk about these experiences, and your story of your childhood experience was a beautiful segue, Barbara. Please come prepared to share an experience, childhood or adult, recent or past, profound or shallow, an experience of deep spiritual awareness or clarity. I want you to describe to your partner an experience that you would call spiritual or religious. When Dewey made that distinction between religion, which was all the forms and shapes and words and rites, and religious, which was the feeling, that's clever, but in the modern age, I think that same dynamic is existent, but we now say religion and spiritual. When people say they're spiritual, not religious, they mean they're seeking or they have had or are open to certain kinds of experiences, but they don't want to sing those old hymns. And so, of course, you can have it all, which is my recommendation. But come prepared to talk about an experience of deep spiritual awareness or clarity to the extent you feel comfortable, and you'll just be sharing it with one single partner. And that will root us in that next anchor of religious liberalism, which is personal experience and personal authority. Okay? Great.
And Chris, I will send this link out over email as well, so you don't have to scramble to write it down. And so thank you, everybody.
Okay, cool. And tell all your friends, more the merrier, and I hope to see you all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.